with the NFL season right around the corner. He has a few wide receivers, though, with fantasy drafts in the next 2-3 weeks here that I would avoid going into your drafts. The first guy is Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. So Thomas, he's already banged up. He got ankle surgery in July he waited for when he could have got it right away after the season last year. So Thomas, the last 2 seasons now, he's pretty much been a waste in fantasy football here. Last year he was on and off the field, hurt, injured, and he wasn't productive in nothing. And now with Drew Brees retiring over the last season, I think it's going to be harder for Thomas to have a bigger season, even if he was 100% healthy. And him and Sean Payton just haven't been on the same page, even though they had a meeting a few days ago and they said it was productive. But what else were they really going to say? So Thomas, I think he's dogged it ever since he got his big contract a few seasons ago, being the highest paid wide receiver in the league at the time. So last season for Thomas, 55 target catches, 438 yards, and 1 rushing yard on the season. And he played only 4 or 5 games, I believe, last season was Thomas. So Thomas, we know he's a great talent, but I don't think he's all there in for it anymore. He made his money, and he's not going to try hard anymore, in my opinion. And even in the rankings going into fantasy leagues, he's going about 10th to 12th round right now. But I don't even want him, period. Even though I could see part of him have a breakout season this year once again, but I just don't see it for whatever reason. And it wouldn't surprise me to see Thomas be traded by midseason or even cut by the New Orleans Saints if things keep getting worse, because he's a guy that I just think he made his money now, and that's all. He's got the guaranteed money, so why should he go out there and try hard? And him getting that surgery later on right before training camp is a sign to me that this guy don't care about playing football, and he's a guy I don't care about drafting in the upcoming drafts in the next few weeks. The next wide receiver I'm going to avoid this season in drafts is Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. We know Deebo, he's a gadget guy. We know he's an explosive playmaker. But he's another guy that's been injured as well the first 2 seasons of his NFL career. And right now, he's going about 7th or 8th round in most fantasy drafts, where I've seen him be flexes or even number 3 receivers if you play in 3 wide receiver leagues. And we know this guy can make plays, but he's a guy that's always injured, in my opinion. And also, we don't know what's going to go on over there at quarterback in San Francisco. My opinion, Jimmy G's going to start the year as the starter the first 2 or 3 weeks, and if San Francisco's struggling, they're going to pull him, obviously, and bring in Trey Lance, where we hear nothing but good things about him. And I've mentioned this before, Lance is a guy I'm going to talk about as the weeks go on, because I think he's going to be a good quarterback for fantasy football, better than maybe real life, and he's a guy I definitely would target as a sleeper, but that's a video for another day about Trey Lance. But Deebo Samuel, we know he's explosive when he's good, but he's just a guy that's been injury prone, and I don't know how long he's going to stay on the field. And I know he's going down there in draft 7th, 8th round, but I still don't want to bother with him because I don't know what I'm going to get from him. And I don't think the San Francisco offensive line or quarterback situation is really good right now, the way things are going and the reports so far out of San Francisco. The next wide receiver I'm going to avoid is DJ Chark of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Chark, he had a down season last year, and I know they went through 3 quarterbacks over there in Jacksonville, and it's been a merry-go-round. But now, obviously, they drafted Trevor Lawrence as the first pick overall in the NFL draft in the last season. And right here, DJ Chark, he's banged up already with the finger injury, but I believe he'll be ready for week 1 at Houston. But besides him, they don't really got many playmakers at the wide receiver position. Obviously, they drafted Travis Etienne, former running back with Trevor Lawrence as well in college in Clemson. And also you got James Robinson, who came out of nowhere last season as a 6th round pick and was one of the best running backs in fantasy football and definite surprises. So DJ Chark last season, decent year, 53 catches, 706 yards, 5 touchdowns. That was good for about flex to a 4th or 5th wide receiver production on your fantasy team. But there were a lot of ball games where even in PPR leagues, he didn't even manage to get double digits. And this season, the projections here for DJ Chark, 785 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. So those are numbers I definitely could see happening. But I'm not going to waste a 7th or 8th round pick on DJ Chark when I think there's more intriguing and better options out there, including some rookies I like a lot that I could get in that position. You could get a Devonta Smith there or even later in drafts. Corey Davis I like, even though he's with a new team, but he'll be the number 1 wide receiver for the Jets I like in that position. And even I like this year, Jamar Chase is a guy that definitely can break out in his rookie season over DJ Chark. So those guys I'd rather have than Chark this season. I know he's on Jacksonville. I know he's got the top pick in the NFL draft at quarterback now, but I just don't see a big year out of DJ Chark. And their projections, I think, are pretty much on par with the 780 yards and 5 touchdowns. The next wide receiver I'm going to avoid this year in drafts is Kenny Golladay, the New York Giants. So obviously he was a big addition to this Giant offense. But already, another thing with him, the hamstring injury. And obviously for wide receiver, that's a big part of your game, that hamstring. Cutting, jumping, running routes. And right now he's banged up. They say it's minor right now. But it wouldn't surprise me to see Kenny Golladay miss Week 1 versus Denver or be limited in Week 1, even though we're 3 weeks away from the season just about right now. So last season, Golladay, he missed a tons of games. I think he missed 10 to 12 games or something along those lines. And he finished the year with 20 catches for 338 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. But this season, they're projecting him 64 catches, 1,064 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So those are numbers. I think it's a pretty sound projection. They're not projecting him to play every game, but they're projecting him to crack the 1,000 yards receiving. And his touchdown total ain't that crazy. It's 6 touchdowns in obviously 17 regular season games now. But he's a guy I can't trust. And he's going 4th to 5th round in most fantasy drafts that I've seen so far in the early mocks. And his preseason ranking is 68th here for Golladay. So Golladay, he's getting projected as a number 3 or flex receiver or number 2, depending which way you go in your fantasy drafts. But with Daniel Jones, I don't think he's that good of a quarterback, honestly, where these guys are going to be consistent at the wide receiver position. And we've seen enough of Daniel Jones over the first 2 seasons. A lot of turnovers, a lot of 50-50 balls. I know Kenny Golladay is the best receiver that he's going to be playing with in his short NFL career. But I just don't buy it right now. And already off the bat in training camp with the hamstring injury, it raises a red flag for me. So I'm going to definitely avoid Golladay this season, unless you could steal him way late in your drafts. But the way he's going in drafts, his ADP, he's a guy I'm definitely going to avoid. In the 5th and final wide receiver, I'm going to avoid this season in drafts, Odell Beckham Jr. of the Cleveland Browns. So right here, Beckham Jr., he got off to a pretty good start, I'm not going to lie, last season. But once again, that ACL went out, and he was out for the season. From Week 4 on was Beckham. So he finished the year last year, 18 passing yards, 72 rushing yards, a touchdown, 43 targets, 23 catches out of him, 319 yards and 3 touchdowns. So pretty good production for a guy who only played a handful of games last year. And this season, they're projecting 71 catches, 985 yards, and 7 touchdowns. We know Baker Mayfield, he had a breakout season last year. And this Brown team played real good football, no doubt about it, even without Odell Beckham. But 2 seasons ago, a lot of games where Beckham disappeared, a lot of games where maybe he broke 10 points in PPR leagues. And he's another guy right now with the injury track record, getting hurt 2 out of the last 3 seasons with big injuries was Beckham. Obviously, the final year with the Giants, he got hurt. And then last season with the ACL. And he's a guy like Kenny Golladay, ranked 66th coming into drafts. And another guy going 4th or 5th round in most fantasy league drafts I've seen so far in the early going. And he's a guy I don't want to deal with the headache with his disappearing acts throughout games over the last 2 out of 3 years with the injury concerns. And just, I don't think Baker Mayfield is going to be as good as last year for some reason this year. So right now, if I could avoid Odell Beckham and get better options this season, like I like Mike Evans over him, I like Adam Thielen over him, Chase Claypool, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, those type of players I'd rather have on my roster than an Odell Beckham this season. And he's a guy I'm going to avoid. I know he'll probably be a 2 or 3 receiver at the flex in most fantasy teams this year. But I'm just going to avoid him with everything that's gone on over the last few seasons. I'll let someone else deal with Beckham. And hey, he definitely could prove me wrong and have a good year, but I'm going to avoid him this season in fantasy drafts. So that's a few wide receivers I'm going to avoid heading into fantasy drafts in the upcoming weeks.